5 FM na ik 560 AM Guyana Pardan. Kakwapan unaw at kay Wanamaj Deik. You are listening to 102.5 FM and 560 AM, The Voice of Guyana, broadcasting live from the Garden City, Georgetown.
Essequibo belongs to Guyana. The time in Guyana, including our Essequibo, is 9 hours 30. Good morning to all our listeners and viewers on our Facebook Live this morning as we continue discussions with the GRO. So we welcome you once again to another program of what you should know about the GRO. Joining me in studio this morning, we have Mr. Visham Budhoo, the Deputy Registrar General over at the GRO. And we'll be talking a little bit about the birth registration process. Good morning to you, Mr. Budhoo. How are you this morning?
Pleasant good morning to you, Travis.
Right.
I'm all fine. I'm okay.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. So, as we continue our conversation, just last week we touched on birth registration as well as birth certificates. So we spoke a little bit on some of the things that you should know, how easy it is to register. We touched on the online form of registration and so forth. So on today's program, we will go a bit more into the birth registration process. So first of all, for the benefit of all of us, let's start by understanding the registration process. Can you tell us what that looks like?
First and foremost, allow me to mention that the GRO is governed by the Registration of Birth and Death Act, the Status of the Child Act, and the Marriage Act. And every activities that we conduct at GRO are enshrined within those acts. In other words, all the various types of transactions that we do at GRO, we ensure that it's aligned within the stipulated guidelines as it relates to specific transaction. And it's important that I say this because we had experience where persons might have a different perception that we do things or probably they perceive some of our activities to be out of the law that we follow. So that is important. That is the first and foremost important thing that I need to mention. In responding to your question, it is important that a child be registered for various reasons. A birth certificate is given when the child is registered. A birth certificate can be used for many different activities, basically for the livelihood of that child, I would say. In order for a child to have a passport or an ID card, or even to register a business at a certain point in their lives, or to attend university or some institution that requires an ID card or some form of identification, the birth certificate is a very important document at that point, because in order for you to get those documents, like some form of identification, you're required to have a birth certificate. So it's very important. That's the first thing. In terms of registration, when the child is born, it is the responsibility and it is the responsibility of the parents or the mother to ensure that the registration is done at the hospital or at the center, the registration center where the child was registered. Because you have cases where the child may be born at an institution but not registered at that particular institution for some reason. So it is important to ensure that the child is registered. It's an obligation by the parents, of the parents, to ensure that this occurs at the registration center or at the hospital.
Okay, thank you for providing that understanding for us. You touched on something there when you were talking about it is perhaps more likely for persons to register that child at that place of birth or start the process. That might not necessarily be so all the time. Someone might go through their entire life without a birth certificate, and when they now perhaps have a trip or something to travel overseas, to get a passport you have to have some supporting documents, and one would be the birth certificate.
Sure.
So tell us, for that child or that person who went through their life, they might not perhaps even know their own parent's name. What happens then? How hard is it for them to access a birth certificate?
Well, this takes us into another dimension. Sometime in 2009, the system of bedside registration was implemented. And this was to facilitate, to ensure that every child that was born was registered at the time, but before the discharge of the mother. The reason for that is because, as you said, you may have missing information and incomplete registration. And I tell you what, there are cases of reluctancy of parents to go back to the institution and complete a registration. Sometimes it is not all their fault. Sometimes it's because of some level of miscommunication, because they're not aware of certain things. They're not too educated on what needs to be done. It might be a new parent, first-time parent, young and immature, and don't understand certain things in terms of the registration. And that is why the system of bedside registration was implemented, to allow the mother at that time, right there on spot, before she's being discharged, to have a registration completed. Going to the question directly, the parents have 14 days to register a baby. After that 14 days, the institution or the center, the registration center has another 14 days to ensure that the registration is prepared and sent to GRO. Now, there are cases where the registration will come into our office, into our system, without a father's name not stated, or without the child's name not stated. And this is why I want to reiterate the process of bedside registration, where the registrar at the hospital, it is the registrar's responsibility to ensure that the parents is being educated, the mother is being educated on finding a name of the child, because what they do is that they will select two names, because they're not certain in some cases whether it's a male or a female. So they will encourage them to select a boy and a girl. So at the same time, when the registration is done at the hospital, the name can be inserted. In a case where the parents they are married, legally married, then the father name can be automatically be stated on the registration, where the child can assume the father's last name. And in a case like that, there's no need for a father to be present at the time of birth of the child. However, when they're in a common law relationship, it is important that both parties present themselves, or they're present there at the time of birth, and there's some form of identification to identify those parties, or the fathers who the mother is claiming to be, that this is the biological father of the child. she will have to present, or he will have to present some form of identification to verify that. Once all these are in place, it therefore means that we will have a perfect registration. But of course, the reality is that it don't always happen like this. There are cases where, as I mentioned, there are reluctancy, there are awareness issues, there's absence of a father present himself at the time of birth. There are issues with somebody else present themselves in the space of a father. We have had experience with the grandfather signing as a father. We have had experience with somebody as an informant, somebody is there and some family member sign as a father, and it creates implications. So the child grows up, now into the world of working. There's a different name on the child's birth certificate as a father. It creates some level of implication. The child would have gone to the court to get a deed poll, to have the real father's surname be stated into the registration, or the child would have had that document attached on the birth certificate. So it creates some level of implication. What happens after that is that the law was amended to allow a child with a deed poll to have that assumed name on the deed poll be inserted or placed onto the birth record of the child through a request from a justice of the peace of a commissioner or an affidavit requesting that the assumed name be put onto the child's birth record. So that is one of the very good things that was done, which allows someone who is carrying a deed poll attached on the birth certificate to discontinue the use of a deed poll, where we can generate a birth certificate with the assumed name, and the child will then discontinue the use of that deed poll. That document is attached on the birth certificate. In terms of the father name not stated, in the law, the Registration of the Birth and Death Act, it allows the parents through a joint request and that is done before the first birth anniversary of the child, to have the father name inserted into the record. The child name can also be inserted within that period. However, the child name can also be inserted after the anniversary, the first birth anniversary of the child. The father name can also be inserted with enough evidence and justification. However, there are cases where there are certain cases where there's lack of adequate evidence that the parents or the mother will have to engage the court to get a court order in order for the father name to be inserted into the record. For the child name to be inserted where there's a case where the child name was not stated, then the child can simply do an affidavit. Once the child is over 18 and not a minor, can do an affidavit. If the child is below 18 and is a minor, then the parents will have to do, the parent or the parents, whether it is mother or the father, may have to do an affidavit to have the child name inserted into the record.
Mr. Budhoo, I'd like to pose a scenario to you. Mother and father of a child, that in a common law union, they do the bedside registration. At that time, everything is well, both parents' names stated in the registration. The process starts, but then the mother has a change of heart. Can she remove the father's name without his knowledge or approval? Vice versa, can the father do the same to her, remove her name from that registration?
We have had cases where persons came for such a request on many occasions. Here again, they reclaimed that this is not the biological father, that this was a man that I was in a relationship with, and he was there and he signed this child. However, I want the biological father to be on the record. Now, we are not medical personnel. I'm saying this because sometimes they present DNA to us, thinking that we can use the DNA to replace a name in the child's column of the birth record. I must make this clear that we don't have that level of authority. The Registrar General will require substantive amount of evidence to prove, and at some point, at some level, a decision can be made with enough justification. But majority of the time, a case like this, we refer to the court to make a decision, and based on order the court will issue, then we can now make the change in the record.
Thank you for that clarification. Saying good morning to Nadia Ghani, who is joining us or watching on Facebook Live from Toronto, Canada. If you do have questions for Mr. Budhoo, you can put it in the comment section of the Facebook Live, or you can also call us on 226-4762, and we will be able to answer your questions here on what you should know about the GRO. Mr. Budhoo, let's talk now a little bit on the documents that are required for registration. Can you share with us?
Yeah. At the time of registration of birth at the hospital, it is important that the parents or parent, the mother or father, have some form of identification, preferably an ID card. If they are married legal, it is important that they have the mother or father presents a certificate of marriage, because that will help us or help the registrar. I must make it clear that, or it's notable to mention that the person that responsible for the registration of birth at the hospital might be an informant, might be a nurse, might be the parents, in the absence of the parents, or because of a situation where the parents might not be able or unable to create that registration or be a part of that registration process, then the nurse can conduct that registration. Or somebody there at the hospital will conduct that registration. We will call that person the registrar at that point in time. In most of the health institutions, the registration centers, they are registrars, right? Placed there, and they function in their capacity. So it's important to have some form of identification. As I mentioned earlier, if the parents are in a common law relationship, it is important to have some form of identification or picture ID for the person she's claiming to be the father, so the name can be stated on the registration. Now, it's important also while preparing the registration, because I can tell you from experience that although all these are in place, registration, ID cards, the necessary certificate of marriage is presented, there are still cases where we have discrepancies with the records. For example, you may have the mother name be placed incorrectly on the registration. The father name be placed incorrectly in the registration. The issues of arrangements of name, being arranged in a different way, first name come before the last name and things like that, or a middle name come before the first name, or an incorrect spelling of the name, right? So we have issues like that. So I want to use this opportunity to encourage the registrar to ensure that they scrutinize those documents properly, to ensure that whenever they're preparing the registration of birth, that they consult with these documents, ensure that they understand what is stated there, and ensure that there's consistency across the registration and the documents that are presented to them at the time of registration.
I was going to go into another question relating to what you're explaining there about spelling mistakes and so forth, but we have a caller on the line, so let's take this call. Good morning to you.
Good morning. No, if you notice, I have an accent because I go to Trinidad and Tobago. But my father is a Vincentian and my mother is a Guyanese. I was born in Guyana, but on sea. I was born on a boat. So therefore, there was not any proper what you call it, the registration. So I had to do affidavit to get things straightened out because after my father died, so there was nothing that he could have said. Right? I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's how it happened. So I want to know, in that case, what happened? Because, you know, like I said, he was a Vincentian and another Guyanese. So things could not have done in the right way.
Okay, thank you. And what's your name?
My name is Ingrid Peters.
Ingrid Peters. Okay, thank you.
That's why I thought like that.
Okay, no problem. So we will have your question answered. Thanks for calling, Ingrid.
Yes.
Right, so that question there from Ms. Peters.
All right. Yes. Let me outline a few things in relation to that. A child can be naturalized through descent. In her case, she has that's a typical case of where she can be naturalized through descent. However, there's some requirements. In order for a child to be naturalized through descent, meaning that one of her parents must be a born Guyanese, not a naturalized Guyanese. Either her mother or father must be a born Guyanese, and it's important that we able to ascertain that the Guyanese parents is indeed the child's parent. Right? The born Guyanese is indeed the child's parent, which means that we will look for the name and ensure that it's consistent across the child's birth record. That is important. The documents required for such a transaction are the registration of birth or the birth certificate of the child from the country of birth. If it's in a different language, it must be translated into English. Some form of identification for the child. If the child is over 18, we will ask for that. And if the child is below 18 and they have some form of identification, we also will accept that. Some form of identification for the Guyanese parent. And there's an application form that the applicant will have to get filled up on all of that. I think that she went through all of that. And however, she did indicate that an affidavit was done. I'm not sure if the person would have engaged the Registrar General on this case already and what was told to her, if she was advised to do an affidavit, and I'm not sure what transpired after the affidavit was done. However, it's important that we able to draw the distinction between the parent's name on the child's birth record and the parents who she claimed to be the Guyanese parent of her. So that is very important in a case like that. If the person can put all the documents, this is my advice, because I'm not sure what is the status of her application. If she can put all the all the documents together and engage the Registrar General, I'm sure that there might be, she can able to get a better explanation on what can be done to proceed with a transaction, or what can be done going forward with a transaction of that nature. There's always some way or some option that we can use to facilitate the process. If we can, then we will send the person to the relevant authority, probably the court, and in a case like that, also we will advise them to go to the institution where the birth was registered, right? And see if they can get an extract of the record or some evidence to prove that the birth was indeed registered in a particular country, or if the birth was not registered, at least some evidence that that the person born in this country, she was born in wherever, probably in a remote community or not in an institution, but some evidence that somebody give birth to her, some evidence that a nurse attend to her, or somebody attend to her, affidavit, maybe support affidavit, some evidence to prove that, to give us some assurance that indeed this person was born in a particular community, in a remote community, in a boat, in a house or something that was not registered. But we need some evidence. We will ask them to ensure that they exhaust all of that. And if they reach to a point that nothing can be provided, then the Registrar General can make a decision on the way forward.
Thank you, Mr. Budhoo. I did take Ms. Peters' number down, so we'll have someone perhaps reach out to her to provide further clarification and direction. We're almost at the end of the program, but it is about 5 minutes more remaining. But I wanted to touch on the position of the GRO as it relates to third-party registrations, because I would rather imagine misspelling of names and the things that you were alluding to, the last name going before the first name and so forth. So what is the position of the GRO as it relates to third-party registrations?
All right, so as of recent, we started our online process. On our online process, you have various options that can be used on the platform. Once somebody can send a text message, a simple text message, you can apply for a birth certificate. As simple as that. We have a WhatsApp number, we have our website, and we also have our email address that persons can use to apply for a birth certificate, marriage certificate, or a death certificate, or almost any type of transaction that we do at GRO. You can use those platforms to apply. The reason I'm saying this is because in the past, we had situations with persons coming up to GRO with hundreds of applications, sometimes in hundreds of applications, applying for different people. We want to believe that there's some financial gain or rewards that is given to those persons that will come to the GRO office with multiple applications for different people applying for them. In order to narrow the gap when it comes to corruption, we believe we implemented the online process where, as I mentioned earlier, where it's very simple that you can apply. You can be any part of the world, any part in your house, any part, literally any part in the world, and you can just sit and apply for a birth certificate or any one of our transactions that we do there. So, because of all the systems in place, and because of the issue of persons coming up to apply for other people with some intention, we made it clear, we've put a system in place that disallow persons to apply for third-party transaction unless there's a proper authorization, right? We do allow it to some extent, but there must be an authorization, and we also allow it, myself and the Registrar General, we once a person comes to us and explain the situation, and we are satisfied with their explanation, we also can proceed on a transaction, whether it's a third party or not. So we are trying to limit the third party transaction because of exactly what I said, to narrow the gap when it comes to corruption, and because of our experience in the past, what used to happen, we are trying to remove that kind of perception of there, and for people to understand that for them to actually force into using our online system as well, because everything now is technology, and we want to ensure that people are accessing our service using or simply using our technology, because everything now is e-market, everything is just online, and we want to ensure that we are not left behind as well. So we are actually forcing people to utilize our service using technology. At the same time, we are narrowing the gap when it comes to corruption, and having those third-party transactions where we would have had our experience with people coming in with multiple transactions that has no relationship with those applicants.
Thank you, Mr. Budhoo. Before you go, can you share with us the contact details? You referenced the email address, the telephone number. I could ask Allison as well to share with us.
Good morning, everyone. So for persons trying to reach out to the General Registrar Office, for main queries, they can send us a WhatsApp message on 610-9394. If it is that they're trying to apply for an expedited birth certificate, marriage certificate, or death certificate, they can also WhatsApp us on 703-1190. So that number is specifically for expedited transactions. They can also visit our website, gro.moha.gov.gy, and they will find not only the relevant documentations, the requirements, if they're looking for forms, all of that can be found directly on our website. And the good thing about our website is that there's a direct link to our Facebook and Messenger. So they can even engage in chats and interactions with our customer service representatives to have their queries looked at. In terms of general emails, as Mr. Budhoo was mentioning, in terms of applying for an overseas registration, they can do so by emailing us at groguyana@gmail.com. But we are always efficient and ready to respond to their messages, their concerns, or even if it's just a general query.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you to you, to Mr. Budhoo, for coming as we spoke today about the registration process. I know that we touched on some things, but there's still so much more that we can get into. I referenced the poll, etc. So at our next program, that's next Thursday at 9:30 right here on the Voice of Ghana, as well as streaming on NCN Radio Online, we will be back with another program of all you should know about the GRO. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Morris.
From the peaks of the Pacaramas to the Quarantine, you're listening to the Voice of Guyana, transmitting on 102.5 FM.